Today's topic is all about getting out of bad contracts. So we're super excited to have this topic today.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Yes, everybody, put your city and state in the chat so we can recognize you, please. Want to also say hello to everybody in YouTube. I see you. Hello to YouTube, everybody. Don't forget to, in YouTube, don't forget to like the button and please share the stream. Also in Facebook, if you would do the same for us, please, we would appreciate it. I see a couple of people here on Facebook, so don't forget to share the stream for us and like it as well. Melissa is here. So we're going to bring her up here to say hello to all of us. Good evening from the Bronx. Good evening from Jacksonville, Memphis, Tennessee. Hello, Melissa. You're on mute, my dear.
Hello.
Hey.
Getting situated.
Oh, that's fine. Look, we're still on time, so we have an exciting topic tonight. Curtis, I see you. Virginia Beach, you're in YouTube. Want to say hello to everybody in YouTube. Don't forget, if you are on YouTube, Facebook, if you would please share the stream and please like, comment, because my understanding that's how the algorithms know that you are listening and you are engaged. So give us a thumbs up, a happy face, 10K. You can write 10K in the comments, anything like that. So, so welcome to the 10K project, right, Tawana? I should introduce who we are.
Let's start with that. Since you're sharing, let's tell the people who you're sharing with who we are.
Yes. So the 10K project is the largest community of small dollar investors who actively fund Black-owned businesses. So I've been saying to people, if we buy Black, then let's start investing Black as well. And what does that mean? There was a law that was passed in 2012 called the Jobs Act of 2012. And in it, it allowed everyday people like you and me to start investing in privately held businesses. And I just came from something with the gentleman that has made $100 million doing angel investing, similar to what we're doing. He held a special Angel University session today. And these people, the returns on investment, I have to put it all together for you all, but we've talked about it before, where part of the reason the rich are getting richer is because they are investing in privately held businesses like a Facebook, like an Uber, when they get started early on, and then they own shares early on when the company is private. And then when the company either becomes public or is purchased, they get to cash out. We now get to do the same thing, and we get to do it through something called equity crowdfunding, which is governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission and FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulation Authority, Regulatory Authority, something like that. Yes, FINRA though. So minimum investment is $100 oftentimes in Black-owned businesses. And when our businesses are properly funded, they make, according to Morgan Stanley, they make just as much money as any other ethnically founded business. So now we have the chance to fund our own businesses and plot a course in order to really affect change in our community. So with that, Tawana, introduce yourself, and anything I left off, you can add that in as well.
Yes. Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tawana Rivers, and I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the 10K Project. So glad you guys can join us tonight. So excited to hear what Melissa is going to share with us to keep us all out of trouble and help us learn how to get out of trouble when we're in there. So I'm super excited about that. As Cherie stated, our goal is really to lift up the Black entrepreneur. We do that by investing in them. And, overall, we hope to build the wealth of this community, right? So we can tap into the entrepreneur building of the wealth. And then also as investors, we believe together by doing that, we can make a small impact on our families and generations to come.
Absolutely. So every Tuesday, 8 p.m., Tawana actually manages the Bet on Black pitch. It's the time where we all get together. There's an entrepreneur that we hear from on a weekly basis. She lets them do a presentation, and then Tawana takes your questions as the community, ask the entrepreneur those questions, and then you get to decide as an individual investor if you want to invest in that business. So yeah.
We have
So
a good time. Tuesday nights are a good time.
Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. You have a good one for tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night is a gentleman who does, I always kind of give a teaser. Let me see what the right teaser is going to be. Streaming television. So streaming television, that's tomorrow night. Just got off the phone with him. He's super excited. I'm excited that he's coming to talk. And one of the reasons we let you ask the questions versus me just coming up with some interview questions is because as potential investors, how often do we get to talk to CEOs and COOs and all of that to be able to say, why do you make the decisions that you make? Or how are you going to make me money? Or what's your exit plan, right? We don't get to ask questions like that when we invest in the stock market. So to be able to get FaceTime with the heads of these companies, right? These are CEOs you're talking to. It just makes the experience, I believe, all the more better because you're actually getting to build a relationship with a business that potentially you will be an investor in. And so you get to see their personality. We like for them to be super laid back. They always say, should I do my professional pitch or can I be, is this family? I'm like, this is definitely family. So you can relax. For those of you who have not yet joined us at a Bet on Black pitch, please consider becoming members so that you can have access to that by coming to the 10kproject.com and joining us. Simple $100 for the basic membership. If you're also interested in building a financial plan, we actually have recently added a second membership tier to that. For $347, you can get basic membership, which gives you access to any current and previous webinar, the Bet on Black pitches, and you also get 6 months of financial planning by a licensed financial planner, right? And so that for $347, unheard of. If you're already a 10K member, already a member of the 10K Project, then you would only have to pay the difference between the $347 and your current membership, which would be $247. So that's even better, right? All right. So for existing members, you're getting a real sale. So just please consider that. Again, all of the information is on the website, the10kproject.com. We're all about building wealth and helping people get financially healthy. And we believe the addition of this financial planning just adds to what we're trying to do. All of the education we're trying to provide, bringing people like Melissa on to educate us from an entrepreneur standpoint. Sometimes we get education from an investor standpoint. what Melissa's going to talk about tonight is like life, right? Because we enter contracts every day. So this is not even about investing or entrepreneurship. This is just about living and how to get out of bad decisions we sometimes make. So, we're all about making people healthy here at the 10K Project. And we do that with financial freedom advice and education.
Yeah, so Melissa and I are part of another group on Facebook, and some of you may remember Erica Williams. She came the latter part of last year to talk about how to invest in debt with the group. If you are a member of the 10K Project and you did not see Erica, you can go back into the Knowledge Center and just put in Erica Williams or how to invest in debt, and her session will come up. Well, anyway, so one day, I don't know how it happened, but either Erica mentioned or maybe Melissa was on. I think Melissa was on. We were in this, group together. I teach people how to get out of bad contracts. And I said, "Ooh, that's a good one." But I didn't have the 10K project at the time, so I filed it away in my brain. And when we were scheduling our summer series, I went to Erica during one of our sessions, our mastermind sessions, Melissa, and I'm like, who's the woman who does how to get out of bad contracts? We need her, And Erica made sure that she connected us again. So Melissa, like Tawana said, look, this is life. Put a one in the chat, everybody, if you have ever been in a bad contract, and I will be the first one to put a one in the chat. Put
one in.
Look, we have all done it. We've gotten into bad contracts. We've gotten into stupid contracts. And I feel like this is something that even if you are not currently in a bad contract, this is something you want to have in your back pocket so that you, number one, if you ever are in a situation where you need to get out of a bad contract, you could pull this information up. Number two, before you get into a contract, you could think about some of the things that Melissa says. And number three, of course, is saving our kids and our parents as they're aging from getting into these bad contracts. And what do we do in those situations as well? So everybody, welcome Melissa. So hello, Melissa.
Hello.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this line of work.
Yeah, so I'm an attorney by trade, and I graduated from Howard University. And go Bison. And when I was going through school and after I came out, I really thought to myself, I really want to do something more proactive and more on the offensive instead of defensive. And, you've got the dispute and none of the parties are agreeing, and now you're going to court, and now you're managing a crisis. So I really wanted to work on contracts, and I love working with entrepreneurs and people who are creative and getting to, in my way, support their creativity and what they're trying to bring to the world. So that's what made me want to get into contracts. And most of my contract work when I, was in the sort of corporate world is I worked a lot for universities, academic research institutions, and in healthcare. And so that's a very dynamic area where, it's all about education and new ideas. And I was exposed to a lot of different types of contracts as a result of that. And I still do some of that work as well. So that's pretty much what got me into it. I really love the aspect of working closely one-on-one with people and working with people who are creative and trying to bring their ideas to market.
Great. So then the bad contract lane, because I think you were starting a YouTube channel or something like that from what I remember that conversation, but just the whole bad contract lane, like how many bad contracts do people sign? Give us some examples of bad contracts that either you've seen or you've heard about that people are signing.
So, in terms of bad contracts that people are signing, it's really some basic things where there's not an adequate description of the work, of the services and the deliverables that you're contracting for. I
Mhm.
think, a number of people just make a lot of assumptions.
Mhm.
And sometimes you're so hungry to get the money, that you'll sign the paperwork. You trust this person, or you feel as though that it's going to work out. And so the purpose of the contract, though, is to really memorialize the terms that the parties agreed to, so that if there is a problem further down the line, then we have a document to look at. But I would say in general, just what I've seen is just there were things that people didn't think about when they were um, entering into the contract. People make a lot of assumptions, and so it's not so much that it's terrible. It's just that there were things that people missed because they didn't do an adequate review of the contract.
So, can we really say it's not terrible? Because I would imagine there are certain situations in business and in life where it can be terrible to
Mhm.
sign the wrong contract. Do you have any examples of that?
Sure. I mean, I'm thinking of something that many of us do is hire contractors to do repairs or renovation work on
Mhm.
our homes.
Mhm.
And so, I've had this experience before where it's the person didn't do the work appropriately, and there wasn't much spelled out, and there may not have been a written contract,
Mhm.
and there should be a written contract, right? And then there should be spelling out of what is going to happen and when, and also one of the most important things is being able to tie your payments to deliverables.
Mhm.
So that's a common one I see a lot. And yeah, I mean, I think that's one that a lot of people can relate to in their everyday life. But yes, tying payment. I mean, if you're going to pay something up front, you spell out what percentage
Mhm.
that you're going to pay, and then have a mechanism where you are reviewing and approving the services and the work that's been done throughout the duration of the contract. I think that's important for any type of contract. Um, so that can get people. That is what I would say is the major one I think all of us can relate to.
Yeah, I agree. Tawana, you have a question?
I do. Do you have a lot of situations, Melissa, where people are being too nice in contracts? Like if it's among friends or family or colleagues that work together, but they don't want to put those strict or stringent parameters in place because they may not come across as nice. Do you
Mhm.
find people are not protecting themselves because of that?
Yes, I do find that. And one thing to note is that while you have a contract that has more strict terms, if you don't decide that you want to enforce a particular provision, that doesn't mean that the provision is invalid. I mean, so one great thing about having the contract is that you have protections in place in case your relationship breaks down. And so, I would say put it all in the contract. And then as, the relationship progresses, there's certain things that can slide depending on, how well the person is performing. So that's definitely a good point.
Yeah, it's not a
Um,
problem until it's a problem, right?
right, right. Exactly. So,
Are
I
those?
mean,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
okay.
no.
No, actually, go ahead. Actually, I do have some things that I could, share in terms of what to, look at in your contracts. But let me know if you have questions. You feel free to interrupt, and I'll tie it in with some of the things that I think folks should know. So,
Yeah. Why don't you go over some of the things you should know? And I was sitting here writing down some scenarios. So I'm looking
uh,
forward to us learning, what are, so let's, if you wouldn't mind, let me start with this question. What clauses or pieces of information should be in every contract? If you were to create a checklist for us, that should be in every contract, no matter what.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one thing I always start with the business terms that those terms are going to be in pretty much every contract is you want in terms of the work that's going to be done, you want an adequate description of the services and deliverables. Um, One thing I like to look at is under what circumstances you can terminate the contract. So, one thing to look at is your termination provisions. I like to, I mean, there's really two major types. And so that would be a termination for convenience. You just want to get out of it for whatever reason. And then a termination for cause. Maybe there's been a breach of contract or there's something that happened that you have cause to get out of the contract. So I like to look at those first and take a look and see, if it's because you may want to terminate for convenience because again, the person that you've hired isn't managing the work properly, or maybe they're running into financial difficulty and they're sort of paying attention to their own financial issues or working on another contract that is more lucrative. I think today, so many people in the country are having financial difficulty, and that could be a reason for them to renege on a contract. Um, so I would look at that and you want to make sure that you look at the notice period for termination, right? So depending on what you're doing, you may need enough time prior to that contract ending so that you can transfer your work or any projects that you have over to someone else, make a contingency plan. Sometimes contracts will allow you to terminate immediately, but, let's say you've hired someone to build a product for you. You want more time, right? There needs to be a time to wind down the relationship. So it could be 30 days, it could be 90 days. And that comes up a lot if you're, trying to hire someone to build a software solution or any kind of product that you're going to use as instrumental to your business. You want to look at too, if the service provider doesn't want to allow termination for convenience, then you want to just make sure that the term of the contract is acceptable to you so that you're not locked into something for a very long time. Especially if it's a new company that you're working with, or this is sort of a startup and a new innovative idea, you don't want to be locked in for too long. So definitely look at whether you can terminate for convenience, and how, if you cannot, or there's pushback on that, how long of a term is a contract for. You also want to look at termination for cause, right? So if there's a breach of contract, if there's a breach of, let's say, a warranty or something where, material defect or something like that in a product, you want to be able to terminate for cause. Typically, it's, or if the service provider, your partner that you're contracting with is having financial issues and becomes bankrupt and things like that. But just feel free, those are two common ones, but feel free to, like, if there's something that you're really worried about, to put language in there around that specific cause so that later, if it comes up, you can then exercise that and terminate for that reason. Another thing to look at is termination, not just for cause, but also for impossibility, what we call impossibility or force majeure. That happened a lot during the pandemic, where I was working with a lot of hotel and meeting contracts. And you're putting together this annual meeting or this event for your clients, or any type of some folks hotel. I happen to work for a group that does a lot of meetings around the country and overseas. And so having to look at how we could basically reduce our losses and get out of those contracts, right? Um, and so you definitely want to have that type of language in there if it's something where there's something that happens outside of your control. It could be a natural disaster. It could be the pandemic. In the pandemic, there were, say you have a meeting and you're a hospital and you're typically you send your doctors there. Well, because of the pandemic, you need them to be at the hospital, right? You need emergency staff, so they can't come out to the meeting because they're dealing with a crisis. So you want to put, again, if there's something that you're in particularly concerned about, craft some language around there and put that in the clause. And the purpose of exercising a termination for impossibility or for something that happens outside of your control is that you won't be liable for things that you haven't done because you weren't able to do it because something happened outside of your control. And also it gives you a language that you might be postponing deliverables or postponing the obligations that you agreed to do. So that's really important to have there as well. And
Melissa, before you go to the next one, I've seen the termination clauses be very specific, and then I've seen some be very vague. Is there a best practice?
I think specificity is always great. And again, it's going to depend on what you're doing in terms of how specific the termination needs to be. Okay. But I think if you could really spell out, typically with particularly the impossibility, we're putting in, natural disaster, labor strike, medical pandemic. I mean, just there's definitely
you don't want to be specific there.
Language, right?
You want to keep that as broad as possible.
Well, exactly. So it's including but not limited to.
Right,
right.
So, that's definitely something I would recommend as well.
So Thetis is asking, do you have to have the termination verbiage in the contract to terminate for cause or for convenience?
So you should have that verbiage in there in terms of, because, you want to be able to document what exactly you're agreeing to terminate for. I mean, the point is so the contract is clear on what it is that the parties expect and under what conditions they're going to be able to walk away from their obligations.
Great. So were there other things that we should have in all contracts? We have some more questions here too, but I wanted to make sure people had that.
Sure. A couple other things. So one thing to think about as well is regarding termination is that what happens once the contract terminates, right? So you want to think about or want to pay attention to what's being proposed there. So if you're terminating early for convenience, let's say, or even for cause, sometimes there's going to be a cancellation fee. So you want to look at, are you comfortable with the fees that are being proposed? Or if you're the service provider, do you want to propose or do you want to include a fee because, you're out a lot of resources and time for the work that you've done, particularly if someone is going to terminate for no good reason, I guess, or for, a reason that you didn't anticipate or put out in the contract. You also want to look at, if there are cancellation fees, if there's a way to reduce the fee, in other words, let's say you've bought a product or a service, could the service provider sell that to somebody else? And that's a way of reducing what you owe under the contract. So that's a term for that is basically reselling the product or service or mitigating the damages. And then one other thing to look at is, and this is not across all contracts, you may or may not be licensing content or software, but if you are and you're using that and selling it or commercializing it, say you're using that content or software in your own product, you may need some more time to continue to sublicense that out so that you can meet your customers' needs after termination. So those are a couple things that I always look for when looking at what happens once you terminate the contract or the consequences of termination.
Right. So usually when I do a business contract, there's always a clause in there about arbitration versus going to court. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? Because I think that, no matter who we are, we'll see that in a lot of contracts. What's the significance of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies will want to put in arbitration because I think it reduces costs. Sometimes they're going to want you to split the costs with them, and or they may just have a particular arbitrator that they like to go to. So that's why, like, some of the bigger companies and their sort of template contracts will put that in there. I think arbitration is fine. I mean, I think it's a more of a streamlined way to go through a dispute, or especially it depends on the dispute, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with, say, accepting that type of language or that process for dispute resolution. I think you want to look at disputes as sort of, obviously, if you and the other party can come to a resolution, you should have something in there that says that you're going to can negotiate your dispute in good faith. And then obviously if it's got to be escalated, I think arbitration, agreeing to an arbitration provision is fine.
So I'm going to be a little messy here.
Uh-oh.
Everybody, let's be a little messy. Let's talk about what needs to be in a contract when you are loaning money to a family member or a friend.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm going to assume that you believe that we should have a contract when we're loaning money. Like, when I say loaning, I don't mean like $20. I mean, a significant.
I say even if it's $20.
Okay.
You know how many families have broken up over $20? I say have it in writing. I don't play.
Okay.
So everybody, so put a 2 in the chat if you would require your family member or friends to give you a contract for $20. Put a 3 in the chat if it needs to be something significant. I just want to be messy. I want to take a poll. So a 2, if you're like Tawana, hit $20, you better sign a piece of paper. Put a 3 in the chat if you're a little bit more like me, where it has to be significant enough. Okay, so I'm seeing 3s. So let's assume that it is, significant enough, and everybody's threshold is different for that. Again, what are some of the things that we want to consider? And I will say as well, we had a fabulous Bet on Black pitch. I just invested as well, Tawana, from that Bet on Black pitch and Pigeon Loans. So I'm just going to say that we're going to do a shout out to Pigeon Loans. If anyone doesn't know what that is, join our email list.
Yeah, join our email list. We'll tell you can watch the replay.
Yes. But that caused me to think about it as well, because I put my investment in for that this weekend. But so Melissa,
yes.
Again, the question is, Loaning money to family and friends. What needs to be in that document?
Well, one thing that should be in that document is there should be a late penalty or a late fee. Okay.
Mm.
Um, so first of all, it needs to be spelled out in terms of what's the amount, the amount of the loan, of course, and then what the interest is, right, on that loan, and how often, when it's due, right, and then if it's not paid, there should be some sort of late fee or consequence there, and that should be spelled out, and you can put in a late fee. Um, and then pretty much, you're not going to be able to charge more than what would be allowed under the law that governs that contract. But so you put in the late fee and say, or the highest amount that is permitted under law, whichever is less. That's what I like to put. Um, Another thing that you should have also the governing law. That's going to, if there is a dispute where you're going to small claims court and trying to get this money back, you need to put in where you would like for what jurisdiction or what state law you would like to govern the contract. So I put that in there. And also, if you do go to court and you prevail, you should put in that, they're going to pay your court costs and your fees.
Melissa don't play either.
Yes.
Ooh.
So you should put that in there. That's my recommendation, is to put that in there as well, because that's just an incentive for them to, we take this loan seriously and pay me back on time, or we're going to have some issues, or we could have some issues.
We gonna have some issues. You said it right the first time. You said it right the first time. Shrimp Talk YouTube said, "I'm not willing to give away what I'm not willing to lose." So, in other words, I'm not willing to loan what I'm not willing to lose. So that's something else.
That's true.
That statement, though, I want to put a pin there. I agree 100% with that, but it still doesn't mean you don't have the formal agreement.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It still doesn't mean you don't try to incentivize them through these harsh terms to repay you, or even to consider if they're not serious. I personally think that there's a percentage of people who know they're not going to pay you back when they ask for it, right? Mm-hmm. And if they see a contract like this with this verbiage in there, they may say, "Oh no, this is too much trouble because I know I can't give her that money back." So it could deter some bad behavior as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I'm thinking also when we're talking about this, you're talking mostly about personal loans where a relative is asking you, they need some money to get over.
I was speaking originally about personal loans. Yes.
Okay. And so one thing to say too is that, if they push back on that, I mean, at least it's not the terms of a payday loan, or you got better terms, so they should, if they don't get it from you, they're going to have a harder time getting it from somebody else, right? So,
well, I will say we had our family bank on, so everybody who was here during that time in July, and then we did our family bank challenge as well. You probably saw in the original family bank session that we had, that family collected collateral. And what we were told was they collected whatever was important to that person. So if it was their stereo, if it was, a specific piece of jewelry, whatever was important.
Wow. Okay.
The collateral. Exactly. So I'm just putting that out there as well, that it could be a collateralized loan.
Right.
Shout out to Pigeon Loans, because I think they said they do collateralized loans too. I think from what I remember about the pitch. So yeah, again, this is just me partially being messy, but this is also a fact of life as well. We all have loaned, some of us in quotes, money to people. And sometimes we get it back and sometimes we don't. So we want to make sure that those contracts are are out there.
Mhm.
So Kim is asking a question about joint ventures. She's asking, do you have recommendations for contract best practices for joint ventures?
For joint ventures, again, I would say the term of the contract typically, and I don't know if this is a joint venture. I mean, it could be for real estate. That's one that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, but it could be for starting a business. I would say you definitely, particularly for if it's a startup, you definitely want to specify the term length. And again, what I went through in terms of termination, you want to specify under what conditions you would terminate. You definitely want to also, since it's more of a collaborative relationship, you want to, I would have bullet point list of sort of what are the duties or the role is for each person. It may not be you may not have all the details, but you need to put something in there that makes sense and that documents what the two of you are thinking at the time. And then if it changes, of course, you can amend the agreement. But I definitely think with the joint venture, you depends on what you're doing, but you really should be very diligent in putting out or putting down what you're going to do, what each party is responsible for. And I think in terms of, again, there's a lot of things that I would say across most contracts, but with the joint venture. But to me, that's the biggest thing is like term, when can you terminate, and what is the role or duties of the parties.
So do you find that those companies that provide the legal templates,
Mhm.
do you recommend those? Are they reputable? Are they pretty inclusive of all of the things that you know are important?
I do. If if it's Google or some other reputable or big company, they tend to have a pretty tight agreement, and it's kind of hard to negotiate with them because they're so big and they do so much business. And it just depends. I think with contracts, it's one thing. There's so many different. Really depends on the business activity that you're trying to do. So it's hard to give a lot of generalities. And also, one thing with contracts, it's you have to be cognizant of that. There's the provisions work together. Meaning to say that instead of it's we have a tendency to hone in on sort of one provision or a handful, but there's a lot of moving parts. So, if you're dealing with, let's say, intellectual property ownership rights, or, a product where you need, you're looking at sort of a warranty, getting a warranty for defects, or that it's going to be built to the specifications of your work order or your proposal. You've got to look at that as well. But I think all of them work together. Not every single provision, but I like to say termination, the statement of work, very important, obviously, and any types of remedies. Looking at warranties, looking at if you have a product that's not going to work, is the service provider going to replace it, or they're going to pay you back what you paid for it, things of that nature. So you want to look at like all of those provisions, and they should all work together, and hopefully work, in your favor as much as possible. And that would be you pushing back on, getting some of those things that will be helpful to you, especially if you're running a business or, you're paying a lot for something. It'll be helpful or favorable to you if you need to terminate.
So I have another common type of contract,
Mhm.
and that is an employment contract. So we talked initially about loaning money, but this is something else. People will have to sign employment contracts, and
Mhm.
I wonder. So I haven't had a W-2 in many years, as many of you are about to tell from my ignorant question. But is it possible for people to have their attorneys review employment contracts and change them up within big companies, within mid-sized companies? Is that something people should really be concerned about? Should people be looking at certain areas of their employment contract and, and be concerned, et cetera? Or what are people looking for within those employment contracts that could get them tripped up?
So several things come to mind. I One thing is to look at any type of expenses that you may have outside, you know, expenses that you need to fulfill your employment duties that come out of pocket. Um, those are some things that you should make sure that you put in language around being reimbursed for those things. A lot of folks who have, or sometimes employment contracts, as you know, most employment, at least in the U.S., is at will.
Well, right.
But there are some instances where uh, folks have employment contracts. Maybe they're a key person in the business. I've worked with doctors who work in particular medical specialties where they typically have an employment contract. And one of the things that comes up as well is any sort of non-compete clause, because if you're coming in, let's say you're blanking on fetal. It's not an obstetrician, but it's the type of specialty where you're,
Something?
yeah, like if there's problems in the pregnancy that go above the obstetrician level or general practitioner level, they tend to, the practice that's hiring them is saying, well, I'm putting out a lot of money and time to train you in this specialty. And so they're concerned about you leaving and opening up a competing practice nearby, right? So sometimes a non-compete clause is put in there. And so you're going to have, depending on what side you're on, you're going to have to try to negotiate that as favorably to yourself as you can. In terms of, and then I would say again, I did mention just additional purchases or additional expenses of employment that you want to make sure are reimbursed, particularly for key persons or high level people who may be traveling and doing different things and may have to pay out of pocket at times. Those are two things that come to mind with the employment contract. Again, looking at the term, looking at, can you negotiate incremental raises from year to year? That would be good. So that's something that comes up too, because the contract, particularly I'm thinking of with the doctor, was for maybe 3 or 4 years. And I think it was interesting, she was saying they didn't have a raise for the 4th year. And the practice's lawyer was like, well, but she's making $400,000, So, well, that's not the point. So she would say, but it's all going to taxes because I'm an employee. So those things come up again, typical.
Cost of living,
Hey,
I mean, inflation is 5%,
yep. And
So
she was living in the DC area. So that comes up too. I mean, I think with the contract, you can look to sort of how are we going to have raises? Oh, also, how will your performance be evaluated? That should be put in there too, that there's a period for performance evaluation and that may be tied to the raise and, what the raise would be. And so things like that. And I'm thinking with the doctor, again, insurance. So it just depends on what, with the practice cover, the person's insurance. And so it just depends on, what what type of, industry you're in is going to dictate sort of what you would be most concerned about in that employment agreement.
Yeah. And Willie in YouTube brings up a good point of reading. He's saying the employment bylaws, but I think it's the employee handbook is what you're
Mm-hmm.
referring to. So Willie, that's a very good point about really reading the employee handbook. The other thing that I've heard is depending on the type of job that you have, if you start creating an innovation within the company and you use the company resources and then you leave, but you're like, but I invented this for the company. There are certain, this is what I've heard, certain employment contracts where even though you invented it, the company owns it because you use company resources. So,
Yes, that is a good point. Is that and this happens, I'm thinking, with academic institutions, right? Where you're innovative research but if you're doing this within the scope of your employment, or you are using institutional facilities and administration resources, then that employer could say that they own that work. And typically that's spelled out in any employee handbook or contract that you sign. So
yeah,
that
a lot of people don't know that. So
and
we have a couple of other.
one other
Oh,
thing
sorry,
I
go
would
ahead.
say too, if that is an issue, one thing you want to do is typically these institutions will have someone that looks at outside, like any type of consulting work agreement that you have that you're doing. They'll look at that to see if there's any conflicts or anything they would be concerned about, or if you're going to be, doing work while you're at the institution during the day. Another thing with employment is also moonlighting privileges. Some employers don't allow that, or at least they're concerned that it will, if it's going to take away or substantially cut into your duties for the employer. So I look at provisions around that as well, your ability to moonlight and to work for other companies or individuals outside of that particular employer.
Yeah, and Kim is saying here, if your job is paid by grant funds at a nonprofit, you also may not own your own work. So, yeah, so I mean, this is very important here. We talk about intellectual property here all the time.
Yeah.
So, we have a couple of other questions. Melissa, do you have a website or something like that that people can go to see what services you provide?
I currently don't have a website. I take on some individual clients. So the best way to get in touch with me is to send me an email, and I have some documentation that I can send about my services and the fees and so on and so forth. And so I can be reached at mel4392@gmail.com.
Say that one more time for everybody.
So yes, the email I can be reached at is mel4392@gmail.com.
And Tawana was writing that down. So
So you could put that in the chat, that would be great.
I do have it.
Thank
Okay,
you so much.
so rapid fire, because we will need to finish in 8 minutes. Thetis is asking about, do you offer federal government services in the federal government space for small businesses?
I don't really do federal contracts.
I know somebody who does, who, if you have like a contract that you need to, what do you call it? It's not fight back, but it's like they award the contract to somebody else and you want to protest it.
Sure.
Yeah, I know somebody, Thetis, so you can send me info@the10kproject.com and I can get you in touch with an attorney that specializes in that. Kim is asking, how do terms of service differ?
Terms of service. I'm trying to think, are you referring to the sort of terms of, I'm thinking of say a product developer or someone who's offering a solution and they want, you may need help or like a help desk or help in
Yeah, Kim, if
servicing the
you're
product.
able to clarify that
Yeah.
question, that'd be
Mhm.
great. Kim has another question here. Oh, Kim is saying terms of service in app use.
Oh,
Okay.
So
Terms
what
of
does that
service,
mean
I see.
there? Yeah.
So in terms of how you can use that app, I mean, they will specify sort of what uses you can use that app for, and also if you're putting content, or that's one thing to look for in any type of app contract, is if you're going to be putting in content or materials or uploading information to a website, that the contract specifies that that content is yours, right, and that you own that content, and that they can only use it in order to perform the service that you've hired them for, or to do any kind of checks on bettering their service. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
Kim, in your question, are you the developer or are you the customer? Because if you're the developer, I would imagine you would also have to be very clear on what your app is also accessing, right? So if I download your app, what do you now have access to on my device, or what other private or personal information you now have of mine that you have access to? I'd imagine she said yes, so she's the developer in this scenario.
Okay. So as the developer, you definitely want to put in there, you're going to have to extend any license. So there may be components or materials that you're getting from an outside party that you didn't create. So you would want to make sure you have the proper licenses to use those materials, and then pass that on to the customer, that they have a license to use those components in the use of your service or product. You want to look at ownership of, retaining obviously your ownership rights to the services or to the product that you created. Um, that's a huge thing around ownership and use when you're talking about apps and software solutions and software as a service.
We have reached the end of our time this evening. So again, Melissa, tell everyone one more time your email address so they can get in touch with you, please.
Yes. So my email address is MEL, so Mel, MEL, 4392 @gmail.com. And, feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you need anyone to review a contract that you're wanting to enter into. And, I thank you, Cherie and Tawana, for this opportunity and for being able to come on and share with the 10K Project members. I love this program. And I think, Cherie, it was funny. I think when you actually talked about, asked about myself in the class that we're in, I was actually watching. It was on Tuesday night. I was actually watching
I was looking for
Ghetto
you.
Black Pitch. I was,
Oh,
and I
I
was
love that.
so,
Yeah, I played hooky. I was watching
Yeah,
the
I
picture. I
played
was playing
hooky.
hooky
I
because
was
I was
like,
looking
oh
for
man, they
you.
were talking about me in class.
Yes. Yes. So I said, I
So,
gotta
Love
get
that.
Melissa on, but I didn't remember your name. I didn't remember anything except you were in this group. And the only time the group meets is Tuesday at 8. So
yeah,
literally I'm over there like, can I get access
yeah,
to?
Well,
So
Melissa, also before you go, you have to be sure to make sure your information is in the professional advisor directory in the Knowledge Center, right? And
Yes.
make sure
Okay.
the contract specialist or specialty is listed clearly so people can find you there as well. And that's for
Okay.
anyone on that's a member currently. Please make sure you go back into the Knowledge Center and fill your profile page out properly, where you say what your skill is. Even if your skill is a great proofreader, whatever you believe your skill is, you could be an entrepreneur, you could offer a service, or you could just be good at something. One of the entrepreneurs that the one that's coming on tomorrow, he called early and he said, "Can I get the link? Because I wanna explore the site before our pitch." And so I gave him his membership link, and he was on, and I think he spent all day watching videos and everything. Child, he was talking about all the stuff he watched. I said, "How you watch all of that? I just gave him the link like 3 hours ago." He is so eager, and he said, "I don't see a lot of people in the directory." And I said, "Yeah, people put their name, but they don't take the time to fill out everything." And he said, "Well, I'm going to be hiring soon, and I want to be able to tap into the 10K project." So I told him that every time we're on for the next, throughout this season, I'm going to remind people to fill it out, because people are going to start coming here looking for skills and services, and we want them to find you all. So please take the time to do that if you're already a member. If you're not a member, please consider being a member. Tonight is a small taste of what we provide. We've got a lot of past content. I can't even go into how much content we have, right? A lot of content just about building wealth, keeping wealth, right? So not just building it, but how do you maintain it, right? Making wise decisions, the Bet on Black pitches, all of those things. And we want you to be able to share in this conversation with us. So if you are not already a member, please consider becoming a member. Please consider buying that platinum membership tier that has that 6 months of financial planning by a licensed financial planning company. So we've partnered with a financial planning company to offer this service. So it's not like I'm calling up Jim Bob and asking him to just give you services. It's a licensed Black-owned financial planning company that is going to do this. And if you're already a member, consider upgrading to that higher tier as well. So we're really trying to provide more, have amazing guests like Melissa, who's also a member, right? So if you're a member and you do something amazing that you believe our people need to know about, send Cherie an email at info@the10kproject.com, and we'll get you on here to share your knowledge with the community as well, because that's what we're about, right? We talk about the ecosystem. Guess what? We're it. We're the ecosystem. It's us, and so as we need services and provide services, we should be utilizing each other. That's one of the foundational points of what we're trying to do here.
Perfect.
All
Well, thank you
right.
everybody for being here tonight. And we will see you tomorrow, 8 p.m. Bet on Black Pitch. Thank you so
Right.
much.
Good night,
All right.
everyone.
Good night.